All right, we're going to be getting into the second chapter of Ruth this evening. We're going to look at the first 17 verses. As I look at the thumbnails for these videos accumulating, I just see my hair getting bigger and bigger. And among the many things ready to get back to normal, I'm ready to see my barber. Um, well, this is the story of Ruth meeting Boaz. Boaz is from the same clan, same tribe as her dead husband, and that is good news for Ruth, as we will find out as we get through this. So let's look at the text. I'll point out a few things and just kind of wrap up with a kind of a thought that kind of summarizes all this. So Ruth chapter 2, beginning in verse 1. Now Naomi had a relative of her husband's, a worthy man of the clan of Elimelech, whose name was Boaz. And Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, Let me go to the field and glean among the ears of grain after him, in whose sight I shall find favor. And she said to her, Go, my daughter. So she set out and went and gleaned in the field after the reapers. And she happened to come to the part of the field belonging to Boaz, who was of the clan of Elimelech. And behold, Boaz came from Bethlehem, and he said to the reapers, The Lord be with you. And they answered, The Lord bless you. Then Boaz said to his young men who were in charge of the reapers, Whose young woman is this? And the servant who was in charge of the reapers answered, She is the young Moabite woman who came back with Naomi from the country of Moab. She said, Please let me glean and gather among the sheaves after the reapers. So she came, and has continued from early morning until now, except for a short rest. Then Boaz said to Ruth, Now listen, my daughter. Do not go to glean in another field or leave this one, but keep close to my young women. Let your eyes be on the field that they are reaping, and go after them. Have I not charged the young men not to touch you? And when you are thirsty, go to the vessels and drink what the young men have drawn. Then she fell on her face, bowing to the ground, and said to him, Why have I found favor in your eyes, that you would take notice of me, since I am a foreigner? But Boaz answered her, All that you have done for your mother in law since the death of your husband has been fully told to me, and how you left your father and mother and your native land and came to the people that you did not know before. The Lord repay you for what you have done, and a full reward be given you by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge. And then she said, I have found favor in your eyes, my Lord, for you have comforted me and spoken kindly to your servant, though I am not one of your servants. And at mealtime Boaz said to her, Come here and eat some bread, and dip your morsel in the wine. So she sat beside the reapers, and he passed to her roasted grain, and she ate until she was satisfied, and she had some left over. And when she rose to glean, Boaz instructed his young men, saying, Let her glean even among the sheaves, and do not reproach her. And also pull out some from the bundles for her, and leave it for her to glean, and do not rebuke her. So she gleaned in the field until evening. Then she beat out what she had gleaned, and it was about an ephah of barley. So in this first part, we're told about Naomi having a relative of her husband's, a man from the same clan. This is Boaz, and this kind of tells us this is good news because of family connections is what you need. This time there was the concept of levirate marriage, where if there were two brothers and one of the brothers died, and he had left a widow and didn't have children, the the brother would be responsible for um, taking her in as a wife to provide for her, to care for her, and raise up a son who would be kind of the heir of the brother, continue the name. And though the scriptures don't explicitly, when they lay out this law, talk about this going beyond brothers, it seems to be kind of the case here that this could extend through other relations as well. So we're told this piece of information before the story of Ruth going out to the field, and so you have to imagine these two widows need to provide to eat, and so the way the scriptures have or the way God's law was given that provided a way for, at that time, for people to care for themselves if they didn't have land, if they didn't have um, resources, is when people went to the harvest and they cut the grain. Some of the grain would fall, and they weren't allowed to pick that up. Whatever kind of fell by the way as they were harvesting was to be left for other people who could come in and pick up what was called leftovers. In other words, they couldn't be super efficient, and whatever was left was going to be the food for those who had nothing. Now, this is laid out for us in Deuteronomy, Leviticus. Deuteronomy 24, verse 19 says, "When you reap your harvest in the field and forget a sheaf in the field, you shall not go back to get it. It shall be for the sojourner, the fatherless, and the widow, that the Lord your God may bless you in all the work of your hands." Then, as well, in Leviticus 19, verses 9 and 10, "When you reap the harvest of your land, you shall not reap your field right up to the edge, neither shall you gather the gleanings after your harvest. And you shall not strip your vineyard bare, neither shall you gather the fallen grapes of your vineyard. You shall leave them for the poor and for the sojourner. I am the Lord your God." This is um, a, a way God's law provided for those in need, and I think there's a lot of wisdom in this. Um, so one of the things would be it recognized just a social responsibility to care for those who didn't have as much, who were poor, who were destitute, who would go hungry without. But notice the way it does so. Um, they were required to they give to allow this the grapes and the grain that had fallen. Um, but the one who was to receive didn't just receive, a freely packed bottle of wine. They had to go out in the field and collect as well. So there was the allowance for people to come and get things, but they also had the responsibility and the obligation to provide for themselves from that. And notice also now, this isn't, um, everything we should think of when we think of how societies care for those in need, but it should inform our understanding the way God's law provided for things. Now notice they were to be given a portion of the things that were kind of provided by God, the land, the weather, the natural growth of produce, but they didn't have a claim on the other person's labor. They had to provide that themselves. So there is grain that grows. The seed grows by God's will. The weather, the earth, all of this. It's possessed by somebody, but still, this is all God's work. It's natural resources, and in this, there's a minimal amount of labor that's going to be provided just from the sowing, but the harvester still gets the benefit from that sowing. But there is a portion that is going to be left. There is an obligation to give to those, and what a wonderful way God provided in His law. Kind of this idea of we care for others, but also that care means the responsibility to work for that. So again, that's not a whole everything the Bible has to say on that, but I think a helpful thing for us to look. So this is what Ruth is wanting to do. She's going to go into the field and glean the ears of grain, in whose sight I shall find favor. In other words, she goes somewhere where they'll let her do this. Um, she's going to do that, and so Naomi sends her with her blessings, and so she goes out. And what we have is the sense of a big common field. Everybody would live in the village. They would all share this big field, and portions of that field would belong to different people. And I love this, that it talks about how she happened um, upon the portion of the field that belonged to Boaz. And, we know this is not just a random happening, that this is God's providence leading her to the field, the portion of the field that belonged to Boaz, who was of the clan of Elimelech. That's narrator's wanting to let us know who that is. And just as a small aside, think about this. If Ruth had gone in another direction, if Ruth had gone into a different portion of the field, um, the story would not take place as it does. That God is steering and providing and guiding all of this through His providence, because God is at work. Not just caring for Ruth to make sure she's fed, but to bring Ruth and Boaz together, so that they have children who eventually become the parents of David, who becomes the father of Jesus. This is all His covenant promises being worked out. And it comes down to whether or not Ruth turns left or right when she's getting out to the field to decide where to pick grain. Um, I think there's times we overlook the little decisions and forget that God is at work even in those. You might can think about times in your life that if you hadn't have been somewhere, if you hadn't have just gone with a friend to something, if there's so many ifs that seem so insignificant at the time, but really wound up being life changing. Well, anyway, so she happened upon the part of the field that belonged to Boaz, and so then Boaz comes out and um, he's notices her, and he asks his young man, whose young woman is this? Who does she belong to? And they point out to him, this is who it is, that she is from the country of Moab. That she came back with Naomi. And they mentioned how she asked to glean, and she asked for permission to do that. And what they note in verse 7, um, she came and continued from early morning until now, except for a short rest. Um, they noticed her hard work. They noticed her persistence and her diligence. And so he knows who she is. He knows what she's done. Word about how she has been faithful to care for Naomi and to come with Naomi. And so he goes to her and now says, don't go anywhere else. Stay in my field. Stay with my young women, um, and follow them. And that he's instructed the men to leave her alone. She would have been vulnerable, uh, no, kind of alone in that situation. And not only that, but he's providing for her. When you're thirsty, go to the vessels and drink what the young men have drawn. In other words, you're welcome to our water. You're welcome to the protection, and you're welcome to be with the women working for me. He's providing for her. Now, let me just kind of point out here, Boaz models a biblical man. There's uh, been talk lately about toxic masculinity, and oftentimes it's spoken of as though just being masculine itself is toxic. Boaz provides us a beautiful view of what godly masculinity is. He is protecting and providing for her. He's not exploiting her. He's not using her. He is doing what a man should do, of providing and caring for those who can't do for themselves, and protecting those who might be vulnerable. Um, and he also shows mercy and grace. We're going to come back to that later. But anyway, Ruth is overwhelmed with the goodness that is being shown to her, especially since she's a foreigner, since she's not from there and didn't have a special claim to this. She's overwhelmed, and she says, what is in me that I've found favor? Why are you doing this to me and taking notice of me? And um, Boaz says that all that you've done for your mother in law, this is verse 11, all that you've done for your mother in law since the death of your husband has been fully told to me, and how you left your mother and father, how you left your father and mother in your native land and came to the people that you did not know before. Now, one of the things here is Boaz is pointing out your goodness to your mother in law, and also your goodness, even after the death of your husband has been told to me. So he knows that and respects that and appreciates her commitment and faithfulness, but also um, he's noticing how she has come to be part of God's people, how she's left her father and mother and native land and came to the people she did not know before. And this passage is an echo of Genesis 12, verse 1, where it describes Abraham, a man from a foreign land who leaves his father and his homeland and goes to a place he did not know. And here we have Ruth being described very much like Abraham. And there's this sense of where here's Abraham, the father of this people. Here is now the mother of the Davidic line enacting Abraham's faith of leaving his homeland to come to a place he didn't know to take shelter under the Lord. Verse 12, Boaz blesses her by saying, "The Lord repay you for what you have done, and a full reward be given to you by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge." Um, uh, Beautiful image of taking refuge under God's wings. Several of the Psalms pick up this about the blessing of those who um, like under God's wings. Jesus himself looked at Jerusalem and said, "How I would have, like a mother hen, taken you under my wings." And so he's saying it's more than she's just there and has been good, but she's trusting in God. She's sought refuge in Him, and there's this image of seeking safety and trusting and committing herself to Him. And it's interesting, later on, this same image is going to be used of Boaz. We'll get to that later. So he prays God's blessings on her. And then also, um, and she expresses her gratitude. Then we have a mealtime scene. Verse 14, Boaz shares the meal with her, tells her to come and eat some bread. Um, share the wine, and he it mentions giving roast grain to her, passed to her. Um, One of the commentaries said this was they would take several stalks and bundle them together, and I guess almost like roasting marshmallows over the fire, they would roast the grain and cook it on the spot and eat it. And so they're sharing this meal around the fire. And it's a joyful scene. If you can imagine what it must have been like for Ruth to have gone out, not knowing anyone, being afraid of what she would encounter, being very vulnerable, and in that fear as she comes out and hoping to scrape by enough to live, to meet a man who welcomes her to this meal, offers protection to provide for her, gathers um, people around her, that she's being kind of welcomed into this community, and they share this meal with her. What joy it must have been. And then she leaves, and Boaz even more says, verse 15, "Let her glean even among the sheaves, and do not reproach her." In other words, don't she doesn't have to wait till you finish harvesting and move on. That she can even come on and, matter of fact, go ahead and pull out bundles for her, and leave it for her, and don't rebuke her. In other words, don't just let her pick things up, but leave things for her. Um, and it says she gleaned until evening, and then when she kind of separated the grain, she had an ephah of barley, and that's about 4 gallons. And the narrator wants us to see two things with that. One is Boaz's wonderful generosity and grace to her, but also Ruth's hard work and diligence and commitment to doing what she needs to do. Um, a touching scene, a scene of joy, especially after the darkness in the book of Judges. One of the things I want to look at here is Boaz, and I'll just have to say, being from Alabama, I can't say Boaz without thinking of the city where we used to have a lot of shopping outlets. So, hey, um, I better cut that out. All right, so let me think of. So I want to just point out, look at Boaz's mercy to her. He was obligated to leave grain for her, But more than that, he goes beyond what the legal obligation is and provides for her things that he wasn't obligated to. Wasn't required to give water, to give protection, to do these things, and we see that grace building up more and more as the story continues. So he allows her there, says stay here. He gets to know her more, and the more he sees her, the more he's ready to have them even plucking out grain and leaving it so that she is well provided for and protected. Um, that's what mercy and grace is. It's going beyond what is required. There's lots of talk about economic justice and social justice um, that's often mistaking justice for mercy. And I want to just kind of think about that for a minute. So one of the things we need to do is make sure that we're clear on the understanding of what justice and mercy are. Um, I think, with there's been a rise in kind of leftist politics, and a lot of that politics uses the language of justice to kind of say that that everyone should have the same. In other words, those who have less have a moral claim to the things that are possessed by those who have more, and that those who have more have a moral obligation and duty to give what they have to those who have less. That is not justice. Um, Justice is giving to someone what they're owed, and people don't have a claim by right on what is rightfully and morally possessed by others. But we are called to be merciful. As Christians, we are called to show mercy and to remember those who have needs. And the thing is, if we confuse the idea, we lose the opportunity to be merciful if we claim it's justice. If we claim that there is a moral obligation, we lose the grace that it is. And we kind of we lose the understanding of being gracious and merciful as giving to people what they're not owed, which is a beautiful thing because as Christians, that's what we've received. We have no claim to salvation. We have no claim to God's love. It is out of His grace and His mercy that He gives it. And so when we give to those in need and we care for those in need, we do so not because we have an obligation to do so, and not because there is a moral claim against us. It's not because someone is demanding us to do it. It's because we are invited as Christians to be merciful as our Father in heaven has been merciful. As He has freely given to us, we freely give to others. Which leads us to a understanding of who Boaz points us to. Boaz is the Redeemer. Boaz is the one who will come in and stand in the place of welcoming Ruth into his family and bring her into a covenant with him where he will provide and protect. And he points us to Jesus and the way Jesus is our Redeemer. But what I really want us to see this evening is it's His mercy. It's Christ's mercy that's shown to us in this moment with Boaz. Because Boaz didn't do just what was required of one who has someone gleaning in his fields. He doesn't do the bare minimum. He lavishes her with grace and gives her more than she ever expected. And later, when he does step in as a redeemer, he's going beyond the obligation. He's going beyond what justice demands. And he does that in a way that shows incredible grace, um, and does so in a way that points us to the grace that Jesus gives us. We who would have to look at him and say, "I'm not part of your family. I'm not part of this group. I'm how would you look at me, and how could I find favor in your eyes?" And that we see he shows us grace. Thanks.